All right, I'm going to start with my little introduction here. I'm Hillary Gleason. I'm the Executive Director of Backline, and welcome to this month's installment of our Tour Health and Wellness Workshop. These sessions are meant to support and encourage healthier touring strategies. We talk about all sorts of different things in here, but very excited this month to have Jody Milstein and Whitney O'Malley join us from the Music Industry Therapy Collective to talk about conflict resolution and anger management. I'm going to let them introduce themselves and take it away. Thank you all for being here. We are thrilled that you are interested in learning more about healthier touring. So, Jody.
Hi, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us today. I'm Jody Milstein. I'm a psychotherapist and I specialize in addiction. I'm based in Los Angeles, California. I'm the founder of Rockstar Therapy, which is a division of my practice where I help musicians and artists to improve their personal and professional relationships, as well as doing band therapy to improve their dynamics. Prior to becoming a therapist, I was in the music industry. I worked at A&M Records and in music management companies, and that was in the 90s and the early 2000s.
And hello, everybody. I am Whitney O'Malley. I'm a psychotherapist working with clients based throughout California. I specialize in helping adults struggling with anxiety, depression, anger, and aggressive behavior. And before I became a therapist, I worked in the music industry for a music manager, and then at Warner Brothers Records, then directly for an artist overseeing their philanthropic endeavors. And we're so happy to be here today. We are part of the Music Industry Therapist Collective. As Hillary mentioned, this is an international group of therapists and physicians who all previously worked in the music industry. And now we specialize as clinicians working with music industry folks like yourselves. We're based across the United States, the UK, and Spain. And we deliver therapy and workshops like this one to record labels, management companies, including Warner Music Group, Atlantic, Cobalt, and many more. So today we are here, as you know, to talk about anger management and conflict resolution. We will provide tips on how to mediate conflict, how to communicate more assertively, how to have healthier relationships. And at the end, there will be a Q&A. So please write your questions in the chat throughout our presentation, and then we'll tackle those at the very end.
All right. And I have to let you guys know about something that's amazing for our group for MITC is we are very excited about our first publication that is going to be coming out this week. It's published by Omnibus Press. It's called Touring and Mental Health, the Music Industry Manual. You can see it up there on the screen. And it is a landmark publication. It's comprehensive mental health and touring guide for musicians, and it will help artists and tour managers, production managers, crew, artist teams, you name it. And it's helping everyone to identify and cope with various psychological and physical difficulties that can occur as a result of touring. The book contains over 30 chapters, 620 pages of expert advice written by psychotherapists, performance and vocal coaches, dietitians, psychologists, along with sleep, sexual health, and addiction experts. And Whitney and I both contributed to the touring and mental health manual. So it's so cool because we also made sure that it's easy to digest. So there are resources, there are diagrams. It's kind of like a reference guide. If you have a particular question, you can, jump right to that chapter. We have vignettes for musicians and prominent touring personnel. And we really believe that this book contains everything you need to know about touring and mental health. So that's our little plug for our book. Let's get started. And Whitney's going to start with discussing anger.
Great, thanks, Jody. So we'll start with, just talking about what anger is. Anger is a natural and healthy human emotion. People, all of us, need anger. It alerts us to situations and individuals that we don't like. It gives us energy to challenge unfairness and injustice. So anger in and of itself is not a problem. However, it might feel very uncomfortable when you're angry. Obviously, anger can become a problem, specifically when it is accompanied by aggressive behavior, abuse, or violence, which sometimes it is. So it's normal and healthy to feel the full spectrum of human emotions. This includes joy, contentment, excitement, all these emotions we consider good, as well as fear, sadness, and yes, anger, these emotions that are more uncomfortable that we try to get away from. Unfortunately, we cannot help you extinguish your anger, nor would we want to, because as I mentioned before, it can be an important emotion. But what we can help you do is tolerate the uncomfortableness of the anger and help you change the aggressive behavior that sometimes is associated with anger. So underneath anger, there are usually deeper, more vulnerable emotions. It's helpful to look out and identify the emotions that underlie the anger, because these deeper, more vulnerable emotions can provide a roadmap for how to meet your needs. To illustrate this concept, I like to think about an iceberg. So have a look at our diagram. Above the surface, you can see the tip of the iceberg, and that's the anger and the frustration. Underneath the water, you see much more of the iceberg. That's the deeper, more vulnerable emotions. They're not visible on the surface, but they're underneath. And it's these emotions that are often driving the behavior, and they're very important to look for and acknowledge. Let's talk about how to manage your anger. Again, because anger is a healthy emotion and it's normal to feel the anger, we don't want to stop feeling angry altogether. What we want to do is we want to tolerate the uncomfortableness of the anger, and we want to manage the behavior that arises from the anger so that we're proud of our behavior. The key to managing the behavior is self-awareness. So the first step in this self-awareness is taking responsibility for any behavior that you're not proud of. So if you become angry and you call somebody names, or you yell, or you throw things, or you slam doors, any behavior that you exhibit when you become angry, it's very important to acknowledge and take responsibility for that behavior. That's the only way to change it, is if I can first take that responsibility. Next, I encourage you to notice the emotions that are underneath the behavior. So let's have a look at the iceberg again. And yes, the anger is clearly the most visible and most noticeable of the emotions that you may be feeling. But if there were emotions underneath the anger, what would they be? There's tons up here on the diagram that you can check out. But just to give you a shortcut, the most common vulnerable emotions under the anger are fear, hurt, sadness, and pain. Once we know what is under the anger, we have a much better idea of how we can get our needs met. The anger tells us that there's something wrong, there's something that we don't like. And then the deeper emotions underneath the anger tell us what we need to do to take care of ourselves, how we can resolve this challenge. Self-awareness also includes taking in feedback from others. So if loved ones or colleagues are telling you that maybe they have been hurt by some of your behavior, maybe it's aggressive behavior that you've exhibited when you're angry, listen to them and really consider that feedback. So next step in this process of self-awareness, in figuring out how to change your behavior, is noticing when you're getting angry. You can do this by identifying your physical cues. So these are physiological signs that your body is telling you that you're getting angry. They're different for every person. Up on the slide, we have a whole bunch of options. Only you know what your own physical cues are. Might be sweating, racing heart, feeling hot, trembling, tapping your feet. But noticing those physiological cues that your body is telling you, hey, you're about to get escalated, you're about to act out. In addition to the physical cues, I encourage you to notice your stress thoughts. So these are thoughts that are running through your brain when you're starting to get escalated. You might be thinking, here we go again, or you might, it might just be a long series of expletives. You know, only you know what these stress thoughts are, but they are signals in your brain that are letting you know you're escalated and that it's time to cool off. So once you're able to identify these physical cues and these stress thoughts that are telling you you're in an escalation, that is time when you can use a tool to help you cool off. This is the way that you can make a different choice rather than acting out. So up on the slide, you see some of our tools. The first one, timeout. Seems pretty self-explanatory, but it's important to recognize that a timeout is a tool for you. It's for you to take the moment you need to de-escalate. It's not a tactic to get the other person to stop talking. It's for you to say, I need a timeout, leave the conversation, ideally leave the room, and do something that you know helps you take care of yourself and cool off. Using iMessages. So if you're staying in the conversation, to avoid defensive reactions from the person that you're talking to, start your thought with an I and then describe how you're feeling. iMessages always focus on the speaker. So I'm feeling afraid and I need XYZ is a great way to open up a better conversation. Positive self-talk. So as you are struggling with anger, you're likely experiencing thoughts of judgment. You might be judging yourself. You might be judging the person you're talking to. You may be blaming or possibly feeling shame or remorse for the anger or for your behavior, maybe yelling or throwing things. These judgments and feelings tend to make the escalation even worse. So positive self-talk is a choice to speak to yourself in your head with kindness and love. Research demonstrates the positive self-talk reduces stress and it even improves your immune function. So lots of reasons to practice positive self-talk. And finally, active listening. Again, pretty self-explanatory. I'm not going to go into it because Jody is going to describe active listening later. Before we get to that, I'm going to turn it over her to first talk about conflict.
All right, so let's talk a little bit about what conflict actually is. So conflict arises when an individual or a group blocks another's path to what they want or they perceive as success. Conflict also occurs when a person or a group has or will negatively affect something that the first person or group cares about. So it's basically when someone is having a very strong opinion about something and the other person is disagreeing and they almost feel like they're vulnerable to not getting what they really need. So conflict can come from opposing ideas, and conflict is a struggle or an opposition. In conflict, but it can be healthy. It can also be damaging depending on how it's addressed by the parties who are involved. Conflict is verbal or physically aggressive behavior. Also, some other signs of conflict include ignoring or passive aggressive behavior. Wherever alcohol and drug abuse occur, conflict usually follows. And being under the influence reduces inhibitions and often leads to poor communication strategies and bad decisions. And again, this leads to conflict. So when we talk about escalation, escalation is actually a choice made by both sides. When a conflict arises and emotions get intense, both sides can decide where the fight will go. The trigger may not even be intentional, since everyone has their own issues that can set them off. When emotions are high and our brains go into fight or flight mode, communication is usually poor. Arguments are unfocused and thinking may become rigid, resulting in seeing the other side as completely wrong or even all bad. When a conflict escalates and the parties are not communicating well, it is actually ideal to first de-escalate as soon as possible so everyone can cool off, and then discuss the situation when everyone has calmed down. You might want to think of it like a rope. If two people are pulling on the opposite ends of a rope and neither will let go, they both keep pulling harder and harder. Obviously, the tension on the rope between them increases, and that gets tighter and tighter. This is what happens during a conflict. If one person lets up a little bit on the rope or in the confrontation, the tension actually decreases. One or both people must let up a little bit to de-escalate. So if both people refuse to compromise and the tension between them increases, it gets to a place where something's got to give. It's actually a time that everyone has to maybe take a step back so that they can then de-escalate the situation and think clearer. Once de-escalation occurs and recovery is reached, both sides can actually think clearer and reach a compromise more effectively. So more about de-escalation. Trying to reason with a person when they are escalated is very difficult, if not impossible. And when those in conflict have reached a standstill and both sides are being harmed by continuing the confrontation, they each may actually be more willing to negotiate and compromise. The de-escalation process is slow and it requires effort. It goes against our human nature of fight or flight. Yet calm and centered discussion is necessary for peaceful resolution. It might be necessary, again, to take a time out. So some steps to de-escalating, as you can see on the slide: find a private place where you can speak away from others. You want to stay open-minded and practice active listening, which we will continue to bring up time and time again in this discussion. You want to remain calm, and you want to also validate emotions. When emotions are at a manageable level, you can actually problem solve. You can create a plan to make reasonable adjustments and set attainable goals. And then you can actually discuss how to prevent the conflict from happening again. Now, when you're de-escalating a group of people rather than just two individuals, that brings on some other challenges that we'll address a little bit later as well, and needs to be handled a little bit differently. Not everyone will get what they want, but you can try to address everyone's concerns to reduce the conflict within the group. Now I'm going to turn it back over to Whitney, who is going to talk about communication styles.
Wonderful. So the first communication styles that I am going to talk about are typically harmful to healthy communication. The first is passive communication. Passivity is when people communicate without expressing their needs or standing up for themselves. Often someone with a passive communication style will avoid conflict. And this might get them through the moment and feel good on sort of a short-term basis, but it doesn't solve the larger issues. And eventually there's a lot that goes unsaid. Aggressive communication is really the opposite end of the spectrum. Aggressive communicators don't respect boundaries, and that includes their own boundaries as well. Their tactics include bullying, ignoring the needs of the other party. They can be easily frustrated, unwilling to compromise, inconsiderate, disrespectful. of others' emotions and of others' viewpoints. What we're aiming for and what we would recommend is assertive communication. Assertive communication is straightforward, it's honest, it is the key to successful relationships. It is a way to communicate my wants and my needs while also staying aligned with my values, and it demonstrates respect for myself and for the other person. So if I'm going to communicate assertively, I need to stay in the present, resist bringing up issues from the past, and talk about what is happening right now. Assertive communicators make statements required to get the point across, and then they stop talking. If you're concise, you are heard better, and there really is no need to repeat yourself or ramble. Show respect. Allow time for the other person to speak. Don't interrupt them. Let the conversation be fair and balanced. Describe what is happening and be specific. Generalizations like always or never are not helpful. To communicate assertively, it's important to think about what you want and ask for it. This is much more effective than pointing out what you don't want. Say what's on your mind with openness and honesty. Don't expect the other person to guess. To do this, you must first be honest with yourself and understand what you're feeling and thinking, and share that information with the other person. Your tone and your body language really matter. So pay attention to how you're speaking. Are you speaking in a calm and natural voice? Is your body language open? Take responsibility. If the other person has shared that your words or behaviors were hurtful, own those. Take responsibility and make amends. Use empathy. Notice and be sensitive to the other person if they share that they're hurting. Also, it's important to know your emotional boundaries. Share your own experience and feelings without taking on the emotion and experience of the other person. And finally, be open to another perspective. Don't make judgments or assume that you know the other person's intentions. You only know what the other person is telling you. So to communicate assertively, clearly and honestly state your needs and desires, maintain eye contact, use active listening skills, use a reasonable speaking volume and a steady tone of voice. And with that, Jody, back over to you. Oh, Jody, I think you're on mute.
Sorry about that. Muted myself here. So when we're talking about some steps to resolving conflict, continuing the discussion, as we've mentioned, active listening is essential. It's really one of the most valuable tools of conflict resolution. This includes participants really listening to each other without interruption. And we know that can be difficult when you have a thought to say or an opinion. Listening is essential for the process to actually move forward. And it effectively requires taking the other person's perspective and concerns seriously. If you're using dismissive listening that brushes away or minimizes or criticizes what the person has said, that brings the process to an immediate halt. You'll likely miss what others are saying if you're not listening. We must pause to actually acknowledge what is going on. And this includes hearing what others say instead of jumping to conclusions and thinking that you always know the answers. It takes a team to contribute to the success of a group. And this means when we're having a group conflict and discussion, that everyone needs to be heard. So you want to take advantage of opportunities where you do not have to immediately respond and just listen and take in what others are actually saying. So you want to focus on the problem at hand. You want to allow space for everyone to express themselves and so that they can feel heard and acknowledged. And although they might not get what they want, at least they can share their thoughts, feelings, and ideas. And this way, everyone feels like they have an equal voice and no one dominates the discussion. You might think that a problem is obvious, but if you dig deeper, you may learn that it is actually something a little more complex. Once you uncover one layer, go deeper to discover feelings of disrespect or resentment that are actually at the core of the conflict. You want to also identify the root of the problem as you're digging deeper. Once everyone shares their frustrations, you might notice a common theme that points to the real issue at hand that is under the surface. Perhaps a more reserved person expresses their opinion, but this individual's views and suggestions are often dismissed or overlooked. And understandably, they may foster resentment toward the others in the group, not only because they did not get what they actually wanted, but because they're not feeling heard or respected. The conversation's focus should shift to address why that person is not being listened to or respected. So who's ever facilitating the discussion needs to be observant of everybody within the group. Compromise is essential with any group of people to prevent resentment from building up. You want to also ask questions to gain perspective. Whoever the mediator is that's dealing with the conflict at hand, they need to come to the discussion with questions and really listen to the answers the participants give to engage everyone in the discussion. I know that I have to deal with this a lot when I'm in band therapy and I'm working with a group of people. So at the same time, those in conflict need to have an open mind and an open heart. And I know this might sound a little corny, but keeping an open heart allows us to be more empathetic when responding during a discussion and not jump in just like ready to fight. So it is also important to come from a place of curiosity and an actual willingness to hear what the other person or group has to say and ask questions. This might be difficult for some people who are not comfortable communicating and just want to argue their point to get their way. So as I mentioned, I do band therapy a lot. So I'm going to give a little example so that you can kind of hear something that I did previously when I was working with a band and how we were able to get to the root of the problem of a particular conflict. So I was facilitating a discussion with a band who had ongoing conflicts due to an intense touring schedule, and the band members were not in agreement with how much they should tour. So I asked questions to engage the band members on opposing sides by asking, why do you feel so strongly about your position on touring? Why do you want to tour so much? Why is touring so important to you? What purpose will it serve you professionally and personally to tour the maximum amount? And then on the opposite side, I would ask, what purpose will it serve you professionally and personally to tour at a minimal amount? And I would also ask, why do you want to tour so much now when before you weren't so adamant about touring? Now, by asking all the band members questions in front of each other, I was able to encourage communication amongst the group by bringing up topics for discussion surrounding their conflict about touring. And this also engages everyone in the discussion. So I'm going to let you know what each band member, a couple of them said. So one band member said, I want to tour as much as possible because my 2 kids are in college. I need to support my family. And right now is a time that I need to earn more money. While another band member responded by sharing, we just had our 3rd child and I want to be home more. And I want to spend as much time as possible off the road and at home with my family. So I'm giving these examples because it offers some vital information. Those in conflict will hopefully hear what each other is saying and empathize more by giving them a better chance of compromising so that their needs are met, because they can maybe have a deeper understanding from an emotional standpoint of why they have a particular stand on touring. So when we approach the conversation with curiosity and not immediately fighting or arguing, it's a much more effective approach. And it may sound obvious, but in the moment, we all know when we're arguing, it might not be, because everybody is very set in their ways and people can be very reactive when we're in conflict. So then we reach a point that we need to compromise, and compromise is crucial for any successful relationship, whether we're discussing personally or professionally. And when we talk about conflict, we're not talking about one side always going 100% to the other. The pendulum must sway where there's a flow of compromise, and at least a few situations, resolutions go the other person's way. So everyone feels their needs are met at times, but not all the time. So there is an actual balance. Otherwise, we're back to resentment, leading people to question their value within a group and why they're even involved. The dynamic should be fluid, where everyone is willing to check their egos to be in sync with each other and open to compromise. Everybody always wants to get their way, but with a group of people, that's not a healthy long-term solution, as we know. So some tips for managing conflict. You see a whole bunch on the board as far as, just generally managing conflict, but some more tips are, you want to accept the conflict, acknowledge that something is just not vibing. You want to be a calming agent. You want to listen actively and be attentive and actually ask questions. You also want to kind of analyze the conflict and kind of figure out exactly what it's all about. And you want to model neutral language. What I'm kind of giving you here in this list is how the person who's facilitating the mediation or kind of helping with the group of people who are compromising. You also want to separate the person from the problem. And we really want to encourage everyone to work together. And it does come to a point that everyone must agree to disagree. It's also important to focus on the future and not continually drive up things from the past. Moving past positions where everyone is just stuck in their place is vital as well. You also want to share your interests, be creative, and also be specific about what it is that you want. And that kind of goes along with the assertive communication that Whitney was speaking of earlier. And it's very important to maintain confidentiality and eventually reach a solution together. So now we're going to move back to Whitney, who is going to talk about healthy communication, healthy relationships.
Yes. So healthy communication equals healthy relationships. The more you can focus on your own communication, make sure that you're communicating in a healthy and assertive way, the better your relationships are going to be. We would also recommend checking in with those you love and those you work with closely. It's good maintenance to frequently check in to prevent breakdowns in communication or the buildup of resentment. These can occur when there's poor communication over a long period of time. So these check-ins might just sound like, how are we feeling? What are our goals? Is there anything that's upsetting us that we need to bring up? Are there any roadblocks? How is my communication? Are we understanding one another? So figuring out ways to keep those communication lines open. And finally, I want to talk about some healthy outlets for anger, also known as self-care. These can be utilized when you're feeling overwhelmed by any emotion. It doesn't necessarily have to be anger, and you don't need to be experiencing conflict. But exercise, very helpful when feeling a lot of emotion. Talking about your feelings. This can happen with a trusted friend or family member or colleague. Writing, making music or creating art, volunteering, working to make change in areas where you feel powerless. mindfulness and breath work, really wonderful ways to take care of yourself. And what I love about these exercises, both mindfulness and some grounding exercise, is that you can do them anywhere, anytime, by bringing your attention to your breath. Notice the breath coming all the way into your belly. And then grounding exercises you'll see up on the slide. This 5, 4, 3, 2, 1 grounding uses all 5 senses. And this can be done anywhere to bring you back into the present. And finally, getting therapy or counseling. Obviously, if you are working through some really significant emotions, if you're having challenges with anger or conflict, getting therapy or counseling are really wonderful ways to address those. And that concludes our presentation. So we would love to take your questions at this time. And I noticed that so far the chat looks empty. So if you have questions, please take a moment, please enter them, and we would love to answer all of your questions.
And if we actually do have some time, we weren't quite sure, how many questions we would have, but if we do have some time, we can also do an actual like mindfulness or, grounding exercise if, everyone's interested in doing that too.
And also, Hillary and Backline team, I don't know if you had any questions, but we would be happy. Oh, we've got one. We would be happy to address those as well. So thank you, Pooja, for this question. What are some ways to convey anger or hurt feelings to someone when it feels things have been discussed numerous times, but it feels you're still not being heard? Okay, this is an awesome question. Jody, did you want to address this or shall I take it?
Well, go ahead. And then I'll kind of fill in if there's anything else.
Wonderful. So if something's been discussed numerous times and I feel like I'm not being heard, then the conversation can shift into, let's talk about how we're having this conversation. I've noticed that we've talked about, this issue of how frequently we tour many times, and I'm expressing my opinion and I'm not being heard. And here are some of the things that are happening that are creating this situation. And here's the impact on me. And so you're shifting the conversation away from, potentially the content of it and talking about why you're not feeling heard and the impact that that's having. And again, using I messages is super important. So starting off with, I'm not feeling heard. It's causing me to feel like I'm not valued, like my opinion isn't important. Here are some things that are happening that are causing me to not feel heard. And then pausing and letting the other person respond, or people. And I would encourage, really practicing that active listening. So in that moment, after I say my I message, I want to listen very carefully to what they're bringing to the table. And I might get some clues as to why I'm not feeling heard. And I may get some clues to their perspective. And I would recommend, as Jody mentioned, coming into it with that open mind and open heart. Jody, what else do you have to add to that?
Well, I think it's so important. And there's so much about assertive communication when we're talking about, addressing conflict, especially if it's something that's ongoing, and feeling confident in yourself that it's okay to express yourself. When we talk about passive, that's kind of holding stuff in, and it just creates tension within ourselves that just builds and builds until we get so frustrated that we go from being passive and not saying anything to just exploding all over the place, or imploding and taking it out on ourselves. So that's where, even if you've tried time and time again to address something with someone, it's so important to keep at it. And sometimes when approaching someone, it can be very intimidating. So I kind of think of it also as the sandwich approach, which is kind of like, the bread is soft on each side, and then you got the meat in the middle. So you start the conversation with saying something that's inviting, so that when you want to really bring up the issue at hand, people aren't like already like, pushing you away. You want to bring up something that they kind of, almost lean in and like they're like ready to listen. So for instance, say that, someone, I don't know, well, say you have a roommate and they're leaving a mess or something. And so you can bring it up by saying, we have such a great roommate situation. We really get along great. And I just, really appreciate, how, we're respectful of each other. I just need to ask you, then you go in for the meat. I just have to ask you if you can just, clean up the dishes. I would really appreciate it. It's just kind of my thing. And I just, like to have a tidy sink. But, I know that, and then you come in with the other side of the soft side of the bread, so to speak. And you end it with saying something that leaves the person with not feeling like, ugh, but leaves them with kind of like, oh, okay, I feel okay. So you might say, I know that we'll resolve this, and I totally appreciate, you working on it, and, we'll move past this. So I hope that makes sense. It's something that I use a lot when working with clients in therapy, to have this approach so that it's a little bit easier for the other person to digest, instead of just coming out with someone and saying, you leave a freaking mess all over the place. And then everybody is like, I don't want to talk about this. So, that's another way, if you're finding that your approach just isn't being received and you're just not quite getting through to somebody, you might need to kind of go in a different door.
And Jody, great point, self-awareness. So thinking about, what might I be bringing to the table here as well? Good question. And then I know someone was concerned that the chat was disabled. The Q&A is definitely working, and it looks like we've got the chat going as well. So if you're still having problems with the chat, maybe raise your hand and we'll let you know. Oh, great. Okay, so another question from Tara. What are some ways to move on after a conflict? Oh, that's a really good question. Jody, do you want to jump in?
Okay, well, I'll start off. First of all, we have to let things go, and we have to realize that if we're harboring resentment, it's just going to continue to hold us back. So, when you get go through something and you're talking about it and you're digging deep, you have to get to a place where you almost draw a line and you say, you know what, we're going to walk forward and walk over this line to the next, next chapter, or next point in this, friendship, relationship, issue, whatever it might be. So that's where I'm a strong believer, is not harboring resentment from the past, but not bearing it either. Having an opportunity to discuss it, get it all out, really dig deep. And then it's like, you know what? Okay, I've said all that I have to say. I'm not hiding anything. I'm not, kind of shoving it down. And then really deciding within yourself and the other person or people, I'm ready to move forward, and almost agree to that. What do you think, Whitney?
Yeah, I agree. I think it's really tough to move forward. I think acknowledging that it's tough, that it is not a simple or easy thing to do, is very helpful and valuable. And the people who are involved in the conflict need to make a conscious choice. I'm choosing to move forward. It might still feel uncomfortable. It might still feel sad, hurtful, whatever the emotion is. But it's a choice that I'm making, because I recognize that there is no more value in fighting this battle. We're going to be happier and more productive moving forward. And if I am still feeling, the difficulty of the conflict, I might write a letter to the person that I never send, just, in order to process it myself. And if I'm still having trouble getting past it, I'm probably going to go talk about it more in therapy. And I'm going to take, some extra steps, but the awareness of, wow, we dealt with this conflict, but I'm having trouble moving on is a very valuable piece of self-awareness to have. And that's the first step, is knowing, yep, this is tough. I'm having a challenge moving on.
Yep, I agree.
And let's see. Oh, Debbie, this is a fantastic conversation. These are skills that I'm completely aware that I need to work on for my own benefit as well as others. Thank you, Debbie. That is great. Again, great self-awareness there. They're very hard skills to put into practice. So I applaud you for being ready to work on them.
And it's a lot of information that we have given you. So, some of it, you digest it. And that's kind of why we kind of, go over some things and kind of also explain things in different ways. So we, kind of repeated things too, because we all take in the information in different ways. And so I'm glad that you're finding it helpful.
And we have one more from Pooja. When conflict or escalation arises, do you have any tips for the person who may have a harder time letting up, taking a break, leaving the discussion for later? Yes, I can take this one, Jody, and then I'd love for you to jump in. Again, valuable to know that it is really hard for me to take a time out or take a break. That's $1 million information right there. If I know that it's hard for me to take a break when things get heated, I need to be extra vigilant. I need to be paying super close attention to my physical cues and my stress thoughts. And I need to notice, right when I start to feel that tinge of a red face or a hot face, right when I start to hear the blame in my head, the stress thoughts telling me, oh, here we go again. The earlier I can recognize that I'm becoming escalated, the better, because that gives me more time to take myself away, do some breathing and grounding, and calm myself down. So early detection is the way to go. Really recognizing, and maybe I need to check in with myself more frequently. Maybe I need to check in with myself every time I have an interaction with a person who I know pushes my buttons. I'm gonna do some breathing before I interact with that person, or check in and make sure I'm doing okay after. So a lot of tactics that I can put in place so that I know where I am and I give myself the maximum amount of time to take that time out or take that break.
Yeah,
Jody, what do you think? Anything else?
I completely agree with you. So much of it is about early detection, because if you're able to catch yourself on the rise and say, whoa, okay, I'm starting to feel the heat. I'm starting to feel that feeling in my stomach, or whatever, those cues are. That's the time to say, whoa, I got to pull back, because it's a lot easier to take a break from here than when you're all the way up in, the stratosphere. So it's really important to have that, self-awareness that we've mentioned before, and notice when you in particular need to pull it back. Some people can go the distance and they don't need to pull it back for a while. Other people, it's like they can be triggered like that, and they know that it's time to cool it down. And I really like what you said, Whitney, about, having kind of like a plan afterward, because some people find it really difficult to maybe talk to a parent or, someone in particular. And it's kind of having a plan and saying, okay, I need to call my, parent tonight and have this difficult discussion, and it's going to be a possible conflict, but I'm going to make sure that my partner, my best friend, my therapy. I'm going to go to therapy, you know, right after I have a therapy appointment, but making sure that you have some place to debrief. And then also journaling, you know, sometimes that can be helpful. Or, you know, as Whitney mentioned, the letter writing and, you know, writing something down and not sending it, but having an outlet for all that builds with that conflict is really important too.
Great questions. Thank
Yeah.
you all.
There's
for
another
your...
one. It looks like Jess has one.
Oh, great.
Now I have the Q&A in the chat.
Oh, I'm glad that you did. Jess, hi, where is the line between reactive and proactive in conflict? Is there a benefit to addressing things as they come up versus tabling for later? Ooh, that's a good question too. Jody, do you want to take that?
No, why don't you start?
Okay.
Right away.
So what I'd say is I'm only responsible for myself. So I have no idea what's going to be best for the other people in a conflict, but I do have a sense of what's going to work best for me. And if I'm feeling very escalated, and if I'm feeling like I am not going to be able to access the more important parts of my brain, the planning and the thinking, then I'm going to want to table it for later. So I've got to really just see where I am in the moment. Am I calm enough to have this discussion? Am I in a place where I know what I want and what I need? Again, I don't want to be in that spot where I'm just talking about everything I don't want. I want to really understand what my feelings are about this and what I want and what I need in order to feel good about it. And if I don't have all those ducks in a row, then I'm going to want to table it. If I feel pretty confident in all that and I'm feeling calm, then I'm ready to talk about it. And then it's the other person's responsibility to figure the same out for them. So I might ask, you know, is this a good time to talk about this? Are you in a good place for us to have this discussion? Or would it be better if we scheduled a time in a few days or, you know, in an hour? What do you think, Jody?
I think that absolutely covers it for sure. I think that was great. What I'm kind of thinking is I kind of dropped a little tease about doing just a little quick exercise. So I'm wondering if, can I take about 20 seconds to just go over maybe grounding exercise with everybody? Is that okay, Whitney? You okay with that?
Let's do it. Yeah, that's great.
Yeah. You want me to run it through? I can just do
it.
Okay. So
that would be great.
This one, I'm bringing this one up because it's so easy to do. It's something that is really important to do to center yourself. And a lot of times we're living in the future, we're living in the past. So when we're grounding ourselves, we're taking into account all 5 senses. The sense of smell, let's see what it is. The sense of sight, touch, sound, taste, and smell. So that if we incorporate all those senses that we're feeling right now, then we're bringing ourselves in the moment. So for instance, let's start with the sense of sight. If you sit there and you look around and you notice 5 things, and the numbers are kind of arbitrary. So on this diagram, it says notice 5 things. So notice 5 things that you see. Look around your space. Notice textures, colors, etc. Okay. And then notice 4 things you can touch. So maybe the sense of feel, like the seat underneath you, what you're feeling like, you know, under your feet. Maybe your stomach. What is your stomach feeling right now? You know, what does the texture feel like on your clothes? Then you want to do 3 things that you can hear. So be silent for a moment and listen for 3 things that you hear right now. I hear a car, I hear a dog bark, I hear the wind. And then you take 2 things you can taste. Maybe you can taste the coffee you just had or the gum you just chewed, whatever it might be. And finally, the sense of smell. So say you just put some hand lotion on or something, or you smell cooking. So this is something that you take all of these different senses, and when you're starting to stray, you bring yourself back and you say, in this moment, this is what I am seeing, touching, hearing, tasting, and smelling. And you can do that within 20 seconds. I mean, the fact that I walked through it, it was 3 minutes, but 20 seconds, you can just bring yourself in the moment. And this is very helpful when you need to calm yourself down, when you need to prepare for something that you're nervous about. What else, Whitney, would you use a grounding exercise for?
Oh, I would use it when I'm feeling overwhelmed by any emotion, whether it's anxiety or sadness or anger, or like you mentioned, if I'm feeling anxious, I might be in the future. If I'm feeling sad, I might be in the past. This brings me to the present moment, which is very helpful.
So we wanted to just at least leave you with that as a grounding exercise. And just to plug our book again, as a reminder, we're just so excited about this. So like I said, it's coming out this week. And there are chapters about why bands fail, why group dynamics can be tough, navigating challenges in romantic relationships, everything from hearing health, vocal health, sexual health, physical health, dealing with the media. I mean, you name it. And so we encourage you can pick this up on Amazon in the States, and in the UK, it's on Omnibus Press. And so I'm going to put that right out there for you. Thanks for letting us plug our book. And thank you for everything.
Yeah, thank you so much for having us. We're really grateful, and we welcome any further questions. Our contact information is up on the slide.
Thank you so much for hosting this amazing conversation. Love an engaged crowd with really good questions here. Very much appreciate your time and energy. Please reach out to Jody and Whitney with any questions, or to us at Backline if you have anything that you'd like to learn more about or need support in any way. We are here to provide that.
Thank you so much, everyone.
Thank you. We're going to shut it down
Thanks so much.
now.
Take care.